The morning started like any other day on Earth. People woke up, made breakfast, and got ready for work. Children complained about school. Old men sat in parks, feeding birds. Nobody knew that in just a few hours, everything would change forever. Admiral Grace Bennett was drinking her third cup of coffee when the alarms started screaming. She was 61 years old, had served in the Earth Defense Force for 40 years, and had seen many strange things in her career. But nothing had prepared her for the words that came out of her assistant's mouth. "Admiral, we have contact. Multiple contacts. Thousands of them." Grace set down her coffee cup very slowly. She was standing in the command center of Orbital Station Atlas, the largest military installation in Earth's orbit. Through the massive windows, she could see the blue curve of Earth below, peaceful and quiet and completely unaware of what was coming. "Show me," she said. Lieutenant Danny Cho pulled up the sensor data on the main screen. Grace felt her heart skip a beat. The display showed a massive cloud of red dots at the edge of the solar system. Each dot was a ship. There were so many dots that they almost formed a solid mass.
"How many?"
Grace asked. 4,016 confirmed vessels, Danny replied. His voice was shaking slightly. "The smallest ones are about the size of our biggest aircraft carriers. The largest one is—" He paused and swallowed hard. "The largest one is bigger than most of our cities." Grace stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, very slowly, she began to smile. Danny looked at her like she had lost her mind. "Admiral, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Lieutenant." "Better than fine, actually." Grace turned away from the screen and began walking toward her private office. "Contact Geneva. Tell them Protocol Whisper is now active. And get me a secure line to the President." What should I tell the crew? Grace paused at the door and looked back at the young man. "Tell them that we've been waiting for this day for a very long time. Tell them not to be afraid." Her smile widened. "Tell them that humanity is about to introduce itself to the galaxy." 3 hours later, the leaders of every nation on Earth sat in the United Nations Emergency Council chamber. Some had flown in on emergency jets. Others attended through holographic projection. All of them wore the same expression of barely controlled panic. Secretary General Carlos Reyes stood at the podium, trying to maintain order as dozens of diplomats shouted over each other. The Italian ambassador was demanding immediate surrender. The Russian representative was calling for nuclear strikes. The Chinese delegate was suggesting they try to hide. "Everyone, please," Carlos said, raising his hands. "We need to remain calm." Calm. The French ambassador shot to her feet. "There are 4,000 alien warships heading toward our planet, and you want us to remain calm?" "Yes," said a new voice. "I do." Everyone turned to look at the woman who had just entered the chamber. Admiral Grace Bennett walked down the center aisle with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. Behind her came a small group of military officers, all wearing the same calm expressions. "Admiral Bennett," Carlos said, "I was told you would brief us on our defense options." "That's correct, Mr. Secretary." Grace reached the front of the room and turned to face the assembled leaders. "But first, I need to tell you all something. Something that has been kept secret for over 200 years. The room went very quiet. "In the year 2045, Grace continued, our deep space listening stations received a signal. Not from within our solar system, but from far, far away. It was a message from a dying species, one that was being destroyed by a force they called the Dominion of 12 Stars." She pressed a button on her tablet, and a holographic image appeared in the center of the room. It showed strange alien symbols that slowly transformed into English text. The message was a warning. The Dominion, they told us, had been conquering the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had destroyed or enslaved over 900 species. And based on the signals Earth had been sending into space, they would eventually find us. It was only a matter of time. Why were we never told about this? The American president demanded. "Because telling you would have caused panic," Grace replied simply, "and panic would have been useless. What we needed was time. Time to prepare." She pressed another button, and the hologram changed. Now it showed a map of the solar system, but this map was covered in glowing points of light. Thousands of them, hidden on asteroids, buried under the surfaces of moons, concealed in the endless darkness of space for 200 years. Every generation has contributed to what we call the Great Work. We have built weapons. We have built ships. We have built defenses that the aliens couldn't possibly expect. Grace looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each leader in turn. We have been preparing for this day since before any of you were born. The room exploded with questions, but Grace simply raised her hand for silence. I know you have many questions. I will answer them all in time. But right now, we need to focus on the immediate situation. She pulled up another display, this one showing the approaching alien fleet. The Dominion fleet will reach Earth in approximately 48 hours. Before they arrive, we need to show them something important. Carlos asked. Grace's smile returned, and there was something fierce in her eyes. We need to show them that humanity is not afraid. We need to show them that we have been waiting for them. And we need to show them that attacking Earth would be the worst mistake they ever made. On the bridge of his massive flagship, Commander Vexillar of the Dominion's 8th Subjugation Fleet studied the blue planet growing larger on his view screen. He had conquered 47 civilizations in his long career. He knew exactly how this would go. First, the primitive species would panic. They would send frightened messages, begging for mercy. Then they would try to fight back with their pathetic weapons. And finally, they would surrender and accept their new role as servants of the 12 stars. It was always the same. It had been the same for 10,000 years. Commander, his communications officer called out. We are receiving a transmission from the planet. Put it through, Vexillar said, settling back in his command throne. He was curious to hear what kind of begging this species would do. The screen flickered, and a human female appeared. She had dark hair, brown eyes, and a small smile on her face. She did not look afraid at all. Greetings, the human said. My name is Grace Bennett. I represent the people of Earth. We have received your fleet's arrival and would like to welcome you to our solar system. Vexillar's 4 eyes blinked in confusion. Welcome. In 900 conquests, no species had ever welcomed him. The human's smile widened slightly. We have prepared for this meeting for a very long time. We hope that we can resolve any differences peacefully. However, if you come in violence, we want you to know something very important. She leaned closer to the camera, and her smile became something sharper, something that looked almost like hunger. We are ready for you. We have been ready for 200 years. And if you try to hurt our people, we will make you regret it for the rest of your very short lives. The transmission ended. Vexillar sat in silence for a long moment. Then he turned to his sensor officer. Scan that planet again. Scan their entire solar system. I want to know everything. For the first time in his long career, he felt something uncomfortable stirring in his chest. Something that felt almost like doubt. Commander Vexillar had been waiting for the sensor report for 3 hours. In that time, he had paced across his command bridge exactly 47 times. His crew had never seen him so restless. The commander was famous for his patience, his cold calculation, his absolute confidence in victory. Today, something was different. Report, he snapped, as his science officer approached. The officer, a younger member of their species named Crickstall, looked nervous. His scales had turned a pale shade of blue, which was never a good sign. Commander, we have completed the full scan of the human solar system. The results are... unexpected. Explain. Crickstall activated the main display. The image showed the same solar system they had been studying, but now it was covered with thousands of new markers. Hidden installations, concealed weapons platforms, underground bases on almost every moon and planet. They have been building in secret, Crickstall said, for a very long time. Our initial scans miss these installations because they are shielded with technology we do not recognize. It appears they have been studying captured Dominion equipment and combining it with knowledge from other conquered species. Vexillar leaned forward, his 4 eyes narrowing. How is that possible? We have never lost a ship in this region of space. No, Commander. but the species that sent them the warning 200 years ago. The Velkari? They had access to extensive databases about Dominion technology. They transmitted everything they knew before they were destroyed. The commander stood very still. The Velkari. He remembered that conquest well. It had been one of his first major victories. He had never imagined that the dying screams of that species would come back to haunt him centuries later. What is their military strength? Crickstal hesitated. Based on our scans, they have approximately 3,000 defensive installations throughout their solar system. They also appear to have a fleet of their own, hidden somewhere we cannot detect. Power signatures suggest their weapons are roughly equal to ours. In some cases, possibly superior. The bridge fell silent. Every officer turned to look at their commander, waiting to see how he would react. Vexillar said nothing for a long moment. Then he began to laugh. It was a strange sound, clicking and harsh, but unmistakably laughter. Impressive, he said finally. Most impressive. These humans have done in 200 years what most species cannot accomplish in 2000. He turned to his communications officer. Send a message to the planet. Tell them we wish to discuss terms. On Earth, Grace Bennett received the message with a small nod of satisfaction. She was standing in the Global Defense Command Center, a massive underground facility hidden beneath the Swiss Alps. Around her, hundreds of technicians monitored screens showing every corner of the solar system. They want to talk, she said to the assembled military commanders. That's a good sign, or a trap, said General Rick Santos, commander of the Ground Defense Forces. He was a big man with a scarred face and suspicious eyes. They could be trying to buy time. Time for what? Grace asked. They already have 4,000 ships. If they were going to attack, they would have done it already. Now they're scared, or at least confused. Either way, we have their attention. She walked over to the main display, which showed the position of the alien fleet. They had stopped their approach and were now holding position near the orbit of Mars, waiting, watching. Send them coordinates for a meeting location, Grace ordered. Neutral ground. And tell them we look forward to a productive conversation. The meeting took place on a small asteroid that floated in the empty space between Mars and Jupiter. The humans had built a temporary station there, a pressurized dome with just enough room for a conference table and a few chairs. It was a deliberate choice. Grace wanted to show the aliens that humanity could build quickly and efficiently, even in the most hostile environments. Grace arrived with a small team: General Santos, Dr. Lisa Park from the Science Division, and a young translator named Eddie Wong who had spent 20 years studying the alien languages decoded from the ancient warning signal. They were all nervous, but they hid it well. The aliens arrived in a shuttle that was all sharp angles and dark metal. When the doors opened, Commander Vexillar stepped out, followed by 2 guards and his science officer. Up close, he was even more intimidating than Grace had expected. He stood over 7 feet tall, with 4 arms, 4 eyes, and skin that looked like polished stone. Admiral Bennett Vexillar said through his translator device. You are smaller than I expected, Commander Vexillar, Grace replied with a thin smile. You are exactly as large as I expected. They sat down at the conference table, humans on one side and aliens on the other. For a moment, nobody spoke. 2 species, meeting for the first time in history, sizing each other up. Your species has surprised us, Vexillar said finally. In 10,000 years, we have conquered 900 civilizations. None of them were prepared. None of them knew we were coming. You knew how? As I explained in my message, we received a warning, Grace said, from a species you destroyed 200 years ago. The Velkari sent us everything they knew about the Dominion. Your history, your technology, your methods. The Velkari were fools, Vexillar growled. They thought their databases would help them survive. Instead, we used them to kill them faster. Maybe they weren't trying to save themselves, Grace said quietly. Maybe they were trying to save everyone who came after them. Vexillar's 4 eyes blinked slowly. That would be pointless. Why sacrifice yourself for strangers you will never meet? Because that's what hope is, Grace replied. The Velkari knew they couldn't stop you, but they believed that someday someone would. They gave their lives so that species like ours could have a chance. She leaned forward, meeting the alien commander's gaze without fear. And now, Commander, you have to decide. Do you want to test if they were right? The conference lasted 6 hours. By the end, both sides had agreed to a temporary ceasefire while they reported back to their respective leaders. No shots had been fired, no threats had been made. But both Grace and Vexillar understood that this was only the beginning. As the alien shuttle departed, General Santos came to stand beside Grace at the viewport. Do you think they'll attack? I don't know, Grace admitted. But I know they're not confident anymore. And for a species that has spent 10,000 years winning every battle, that doubt is worth more than 1,000 ships. Back on his flagship, Vexillar stood alone in his private quarters. He was thinking about what the human had said, about the Valkyrie and their final gift to the galaxy, about hope and sacrifice, and other concepts that had no place in Dominion philosophy. For 10,000 years, his species had conquered because they were stronger, because they had better weapons and more ships, and no mercy for the weak. It had always worked, it had always been right. But these humans were different. They had taken 200 years of fear and turned it into strength. They had transformed themselves from prey into something that even the mighty Dominion had to take seriously. For the first time in his long career, Vexillar wondered if perhaps the galaxy was bigger and more complicated than the Dominion had ever imagined. And somewhere deep in his ancient heart, in a place he had forgotten existed, he felt something stir, something that might, in another species, be called respect. He pushed the feeling aside and began composing his report to the High Command. Whatever happened next, it would be their decision. But he would make sure they understood one thing clearly. Humanity was not like the others. Treating them as if they were would be a very dangerous mistake. 3 weeks passed. The alien fleet remained at the edge of Mars, neither advancing nor retreating. Earth held its breath. In the hidden facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, Dr. Nathan Cole worked without sleep. He had been the chief engineer of Project Titan for 15 years, and now, after 2 centuries of preparation, his life's work was about to be tested. Systems check complete, his assistant, Amanda Hayes, reported. All 12 primary stations are online. Secondary networks are at 98%. We're as ready as we're ever going to be. Nathan nodded slowly, staring at the massive holographic display that filled the center of the room. It showed the entire solar system, but not the peaceful blue and white version that most people saw in textbooks. This display showed the truth. Thousands of weapons platforms, hidden shipyards, defense networks that stretched from Mercury to the outer planets. 200 years, Nathan murmured. My great-great-grandfather started this project. He never thought he'd live to see it finished. Neither did my great-grandfather, or my grandfather, or my father. He paused and took a deep breath. And now it's my turn to pass it on. One way or another? You think they'll attack? Amanda asked. I think they want to. The Dominion has never walked away from a conquest. It goes against everything they believe in. Nathan turned away from the display. But wanting and doing are 2 different things. And right now, they're not sure if they can beat us. On Orbital Station Atlas, Admiral Grace Bennett was having a very different conversation. She stood in her office, facing a holographic projection of Secretary General Carlos Reyes. The man looked tired. 3 weeks of constant crisis had aged him 10 years. The Dominion High Command has sent their response, Carlos said. They're willing to recognize Earth as a sovereign territory. They'll withdraw their fleet and agree not to attack us. But Grace prompted. But they want something in return. They want access to our weapons technology, specifically the shield systems we developed from the Valkyrie data. Carlos shook his head. They say it's for defense against their enemies. But we both know what they'd really use it for. Grace felt her jaw tighten. They want us to help them conquer more efficiently. To use our technology to destroy other species who might fight back? Yes. Then the answer is no. Carlos sighed. I figured you'd say that. But Grace, if we refuse, they might attack. We've shown them we're strong. But are we strong enough to actually win a war? Grace was quiet for a long moment. She walked to her window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the alien fleet was waiting. 4,000 ships. Millions of soldiers. 10,000 years of victory. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Secretary," she said finally. "When I was a little girl, my grandmother told me a story. She said that her grandmother had worked on the first hidden defense platform, back when this whole project was just a crazy dream. She spent her entire life building something she would never see finished, for a war she would never fight." Grace turned back to face the hologram. Do you know what kept her going? Hope. The hope that one day her descendants would have a chance that she never had. The hope that all her sacrifice would mean something, Grace. If we give the Dominion our technology, we betray that hope. We betray every generation that came before us. We become partners in their conquest, accomplices in the destruction of species who might have done exactly what we did, who might have prepared and fought back and earned their right to survive. She straightened her shoulders. The answer is no. If they want a war, we'll give them one. The Dominion's response came 6 hours later. Commander Vexillar's fleet began moving toward Earth. Across the planet, alarms sounded. Civilians hurried to underground shelters that had been secretly built decades ago. Military personnel rushed to their stations. And in orbit, the first line of defense powered up its weapons. Grace stood on the bridge of Orbital Station Atlas, watching the enemy fleet approach on her tactical display. They were coming in a standard attack formation, their largest ships protected by swarms of smaller fighters. It was the same formation they had used for 10,000 years. Time to show them something new, Grace murmured. She opened a channel to all defense stations. All units, this is Admiral Bennett. The enemy is approaching. You all know your jobs. You all know what's at stake. Today, we fight for everyone who built these stations, for everyone who kept the secret, for everyone who believed that this day would come and that we would be ready. She paused, feeling the weight of history pressing down on her. 200 years ago, a dying species sent us a warning. They gave us a gift that they never had to give. They sacrificed themselves so that strangers they would never meet might have a chance to survive. Today we honor that gift. Today we prove that their sacrifice was not in vain. She took a deep breath. All stations, weapons free. The first volley caught the Dominion fleet completely by surprise. Energy beams erupted from what had appeared to be empty space, slicing through shields and armor as if they were paper. In the first 30 seconds of the battle, 17 alien ships were destroyed. Vexillar's voice boomed across his bridge. Where are those shots coming from? Unknown, Commander. The weapons platforms are using some kind of stealth technology we cannot penetrate. The commander watched in disbelief as more of his ships fell. His fleet was designed to crush primitive civilizations, not fight an equal enemy. His tactics, his formations, his entire approach to warfare, none of it was designed for this. All ships, scatter formation. He ordered, find those platforms and destroy them. But the human defenders were one step ahead. As the Dominion fleet spread out, they became easier targets for the orbital stations. And then, from behind the dark side of the moon, something new appeared. Ships. Human ships. Hundreds of them emerging from hidden bases and shipyards that no scanner had ever detected. They moved in perfect coordination, each vessel knowing exactly where to go and what to do. At their head flew a massive warship nearly 2 kilometers long. Its hull was sleek and dark, covered with weapons that glowed with barely contained power. Painted on its side, in letters large enough to be seen from space, was a single word: defiance. Admiral Grace Bennett had transferred her command to this ship an hour ago. Now she stood on its bridge, watching the battle unfold around her. Right, she said softly. Let's show them what humanity can do. The Defiance surged forward, leading the human fleet into battle. Behind it came destroyers and cruisers and carriers, all built in secret. All crewed by soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment. The Dominion fleet, for the first time in 10,000 years, began to fall back. On his flagship, Vexillar watched the impossible happen. His fleet was losing. Not slowly, not gradually, but quickly and decisively. The humans were faster, more coordinated, more determined than anything he had ever faced. Commander, his tactical officer called out, "We've lost 300 ships. Our forward elements are requesting permission to retreat. Vexilar stood frozen. Retreat. The word was poison to his kind. In 10,000 years, no Dominion fleet had ever retreated. But as he watched another line of his ships explode, he realized something terrible. Something that shook the very foundations of everything he believed. The humans were going to win, and if he didn't act now, his entire fleet would be destroyed. All ships, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Fall back. Full retreat. Now, the Dominion fleet fled. There was no other word for it. 4,000 ships that had never known defeat were now racing away from Earth as fast as their engines could carry them. Behind them, they left the wreckage of nearly 800 vessels. Floating in the darkness of space like the bones of some great beast, Admiral Grace Bennett watched them go from the bridge of the Defiance. Her uniform was stained with sweat and coffee, her eyes were red from lack of sleep, and her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline still pumping through her veins. But she was smiling. Admiral, her tactical officer, reported, "Enemy fleet has crossed the orbit of Mars. They're still accelerating. Don't pursue," Grace ordered. "Let them go." General Rick Santos frowned at her from his position near the weapons console. "We could finish them, Admiral. We have the advantage. We've already won, General. Chasing them down and destroying them won't make us any safer. It'll just prove that we're as brutal as they are." Grace shook her head. "That's not who we want to be." On the Dominion flagship, Commander Vexilar sat alone in his command chamber. His crew had finally stopped looking at him with those terrible expressions. A mixture of fear and confusion and something that looked almost like betrayal. They had never seen their commander order a retreat. They didn't know how to process it. Neither did he. A soft chime announced a visitor. Vexilar straightened in his chair. "Enter." The door slid open to reveal Crystal, his science officer. The young officer's scales were pale, but his voice was steady. "Commander, I have completed the analysis you requested. Tell me." Crystal activated a small display unit. "Our losses are significant. 783 ships destroyed. Another 400 damaged beyond immediate repair. Estimated casualties are in the hundreds of thousands." Vexilar absorbed the numbers in silence. In a single battle, he had lost nearly a quarter of his fleet. It was the worst defeat in Dominion history. "What about the enemy?" he asked. "Human losses appear to be minimal. Fewer than 50 ships destroyed. Their defensive network is largely intact." Crystal hesitated. "Commander, there's something else." "What?" "During the battle, we detected signals coming from outside the solar system. It appears the humans have been in contact with other species, perhaps dozens of them. Species who survived our conquests by hiding, by pretending to be weaker than they were." Vexilar felt something cold settle in his chest. "You're saying the humans aren't alone. I'm saying they might be the center of a resistance network that spans the galaxy. A network that has been building in secret for centuries, waiting for a moment exactly like this." Crystal's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Commander, I think we may have started something we cannot finish." Back on Earth, the celebrations had begun. In cities across the planet, people poured into the streets. They had spent weeks hiding in shelters, waiting for bombs that never fell, preparing for an invasion that never came. Now they were finally free to express the joy and relief that had been building inside them in New York. A crowd of over 1 million people gathered in Central Park. They waved flags, sang songs, and hugged strangers like long-lost friends. In Tokyo, the celebrations lasted for 3 days straight. In Lagos, a spontaneous parade wound through the streets for 12 hours. But not everyone was celebrating. Dr. Nathan Cole stood in his underground facility, watching the news feeds on a dozen different screens. He should have been happy. His life's work had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Humanity had faced the greatest threat in its history and emerged victorious. Instead, he felt only a deep, weary sadness. "Oh, something wrong?" Amanda asked, joining him at the control console. "We won today," Nathan said slowly. "But this isn't over. The Dominion has thousands more ships, millions more soldiers. They've been conquering for 10,000 years. One defeat won't stop them. So what do we do? Nathan turned to look at her. His eyes were tired but determined. We keep building. We keep preparing. We make alliances with other species who want to resist. And we make sure that the next time they come, we're even stronger than we are today. In Geneva, Secretary General Carlos Reyes was giving a speech to the United Nations. The delegates had gathered from every nation on Earth, united in a way they had never been before. For the first time in human history, there were no borders, no divisions, no petty conflicts. There was only humanity, standing together against the darkness. Today we have proven something remarkable, Carlos said, his voice carrying across the silent chamber. We have proven that we are not alone in the universe. We have proven that there are threats out there beyond anything we ever imagined. But most importantly, we have proven that when we work together, when we put aside our differences and focus on what truly matters, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. He paused. Looking out at the faces of the world's leaders, our ancestors received a warning 200 years ago. They could have ignored it. They could have decided it wasn't their problem, that future generations would have to deal with it. But they didn't. They chose to sacrifice, to work, to prepare, so that we could have a chance. Carlos straightened his shoulders. Now it's our turn. We have won a battle, but the war is far from over. The Dominion will return. Other threats will emerge. The galaxy is vast and dangerous, and Earth is just one small world in an ocean of stars. But today, we have proven that small doesn't mean weak. That young doesn't mean helpless. That different doesn't mean divided. He smiled, and there were tears in his eyes. Today, humanity has announced itself to the universe, and the universe will never be the same. In orbit around Earth, Admiral Grace Bennett was finally allowing herself to rest. She sat in her quarters on the Defiance, looking out at the stars through a small viewport. Somewhere out there, the Dominion fleet was still running. Somewhere out there, other species were watching, waiting to see what humanity would do next. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Lieutenant Danny Cho entered, looking slightly nervous. "Admiral, there's something you should see. We're receiving a transmission. It's not from the Dominion." Grace stood up, suddenly alert. "From who? We don't know yet. But it's coming from a star system about 50 light-years away." "And Admiral... Danny paused, looking uncertain. "They're speaking English." Grace felt her heart begin to race. "Put it through." The screen on her wall flickered to life. For a moment, there was only static. Then, slowly an image formed. It showed a face that was definitely not human, for eyes, blue skin, delicate features. But the creature's expression was unmistakable. It was smiling. "Greetings." "People of Earth," the creature said, its voice translated into perfect English. "We are the Velkari. Or rather, we are what remains of them. 200 years ago, our ancestors sent you a warning. Today, we watched you use that warning to achieve a victory that should have been impossible." The creature's smile widened. "We have been hiding for a very long time. Waiting for a species strong enough to stand against the Dominion. Waiting for hope." It paused, and when it spoke again, its voice was filled with emotion. "Today, you gave us that hope. Today, you proved that our ancestors' sacrifice was not in vain." The creature raised one slender hand in what appeared to be a gesture of greeting. "We would very much like to meet you. If you are willing, we have much to discuss. About the past, about the future, and about what we might accomplish together." Grace stared at the screen, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on her. 200 years of preparation. One impossible victory. And now, an offer of alliance from a species they had thought extinct. The universe was changing, and humanity was at the center of it all. Grace took a deep breath and reached for the communication controls. "This is Admiral Grace Bennett of the Earth Defense Force. We would be honored to meet you." "Tell us where and when." She paused, and then added, "And thank you. For the warning, for the hope, for everything." On the screen, the Velkaria's smile grew even brighter. "No, Admiral. Thank you. For proving that our ancestors were right to believe in you." The transmission ended, But Grace continued to stare at the blank screen for a long time. Around her, the stars continued their eternal dance. Silent witnesses to a moment that would change everything. Humanity's story was just beginning. 1 year had passed since the battle that changed everything. The galaxy was no longer the same place it had been. Word of humanity's victory had spread across the stars like wildfire. Species that had been hiding for centuries came out of the shadows. Civilizations that had given up hope began to dream again. And the Dominion of 12 stars, for the first time in 10,000 years, was afraid. Admiral Grace Bennett stood on the observation deck of the newly built Unity Station. Watching ships from a dozen different species dock at the massive structure, there were vessels from the Valkyrie, sleek and elegant like their builders. There were the heavy cruisers of the Torvan Republic, a race of warriors who had spent 300 years hiding in asteroid belts after their homeworld was destroyed. There were even a few ships from the Serati, a species that had once served the Dominion and had now risen in rebellion. It's quite a view, isn't it? Said a familiar voice behind her. Grace turned to see Carlos Reyes approaching. He was no longer a Secretary General. He had retired from politics 6 months ago, passing the burden to younger shoulders. But he had stayed on as an advisor, unable to completely let go of the work that had defined his life. "I never thought I'd see anything like this," Grace admitted. "When I was young, we didn't even know if aliens existed. Now I'm watching them park their ships in our solar system like it's the most normal thing in the world." Carlos laughed softly. "Normal. I'm not sure anything will ever be normal again." He joined her at the viewport, looking out at the bustling station. "You know what the most amazing part is? We're not just allies. We're becoming friends. Last week, I saw a group of Valkyrie children playing soccer with human kids on the station's recreation level. Soccer, with aliens. That's what hope does," Grace said. "It brings people together." Down on Earth, life was slowly returning to something like normal. The shelters had been opened. The emergency protocols had been lifted. People were going back to work, raising their families, living their lives. But everything had changed in subtle ways. In schools, children learned a new history. The history of the great work of the generations who had prepared for this moment. They learned about the Valkyrie warning and the sacrifices of their ancestors. They learned that they were part of something bigger than themselves, something that stretched across 2 centuries and would continue for centuries more, in laboratories. Scientists from Earth and a dozen alien worlds worked together on technologies that would have seemed like magic just a few years ago. Faster ships, better weapons, medical treatments that could extend life by decades. Every day brought new discoveries, new possibilities, new reasons for hope, and in the hidden facilities that had once housed humanity's secret weapons, a new generation was being trained. Not just soldiers, though there were plenty of those, but diplomats, scientists, teachers, explorers, people who would carry humanity's message to the far corners of the galaxy. Dr. Nathan Cole had finally retired from Project Titan, but he had taken on a new role, training the next generation of engineers who would build the ships and stations of the future. Standing in front of a class of eager young students, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Pride, not just in what humanity had accomplished, but in what they were becoming. "The Dominion thinks they know what we are," he told his students. "They think we're just another species to be conquered, another civilization to be crushed. But they're wrong. We're not like the others. We don't just fight to survive. We fight for each other. We fight for strangers we've never met. We fight for a future we might never see." He paused, looking at the young faces staring back at him. "That's what makes us human. That's what makes us dangerous. And that's what will carry us through whatever comes next." The Dominion had not attacked again. Not yet. Their fleet had retreated to the far side of the galaxy, licking their wounds and trying to understand what had gone wrong. Commander Vexelar had been recalled to face judgment for his failure. Rumors said he had been executed. Others said he had been exiled to a distant outpost. No one knew for sure, but Grace knew that the Dominion would return eventually. They were too proud, too powerful, too committed to their way of life to simply accept defeat. The war was not over. It might never be over, but humanity would be ready. 6 months after the battle, the first joint fleet had been assembled. Ships from Earth, the Valkyrie, the Torvan Republic, and 7 other species had gathered for the first coordinated patrol of the outer systems. It was a symbol of what they had built together, a promise of what they could accomplish if they stood united. Grace had been offered command of the fleet. She had declined. She was 62 years old, tired in ways she couldn't explain, ready to let younger officers take the lead. Instead, she had recommended her former aide, Danny Cho, who had been promoted to captain and given command of the Defiance. "You're really not going to change your mind?" Danny asked her on the day the fleet departed. They were standing in the Defiance's hangar bay, surrounded by the controlled chaos of final preparations. "I've done my part," Grace said. "Now it's your turn. Your generation's turn." She smiled and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Make us proud, Captain." Danny nodded, his eyes bright with determination. "I will, Admiral. I promise." As Grace watched the fleet depart, she thought about everything that had led to this moment. The warning from a dying species, the centuries of preparation, the battle that should have been impossible. And now, this, a coalition of free species, united in hope, ready to face whatever the future might bring. 1 year later, Grace Bennett was sitting in a small garden outside her home in Switzerland. She had finally retired for real this time, turning her attention to the simple pleasures she had denied herself for decades: gardening, reading, long walks in the mountains, the quiet joys of a life well lived. But even in retirement, she couldn't escape her legacy. Visitors came constantly, reporters wanting interviews, politicians seeking advice, young officers hoping to meet the hero of the Battle of Earth. She welcomed them all, sharing her stories, offering what wisdom she could, trying to prepare them for the challenges ahead. On this particular afternoon, her visitor was a young girl named Sophie. She was the granddaughter of Amanda Hayes, who now ran Project Titan. Sophie was 10 years old, curious about everything, and absolutely convinced that she was going to be a starship captain when she grew up. "Admiral Bennett," Sophie said, sitting cross-legged in the grass, "can I ask you a question?" "Of course. Were you scared? During the battle, I mean, were you scared you might lose?" Grace considered the question carefully. She had learned long ago that children deserved honest answers even when those answers were complicated. "Yes," she said finally. "I was scared." Everyone was scared. Fear is normal. It's what you do with that fear that matters. "What did you do?" Grace smiled. "I remembered why we were fighting. Not just for ourselves, not just for Earth, but for everyone. For the species who had warned us, for the generations who had prepared, for all the people who would never be born if we failed." She reached out and gently touched Sophie's hand. When you have something worth fighting for, the fear doesn't go away, but it becomes smaller than the hope. Sophie nodded slowly, processing this. Then her face lit up with another question. "Do you think we'll ever really beat the Dominion? Like, completely?" Grace looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening blue. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was waiting, full of danger, full of wonder, full of possibilities that no one could imagine. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know that we'll never stop trying. That's what humanity does. We keep going. We keep fighting. We keep hoping." She looked back at the girl and smiled. "And as long as we have people like you ready to carry on when we're gone, I think we have a pretty good chance." Sophie grinned, her eyes full of dreams and determination. "I'm going to be the best captain ever, and I'm going to find new species and make friends with them and explore the whole galaxy." "I believe you will," Grace said, and she meant it. As night fell over Earth, the stars came out one by one, jewels scattered across the darkness. On Unity Station, ships from a dozen worlds prepared for another day of cooperation and discovery. On distant planets, new alliances were being forged, new friendships being made, and somewhere in the vast reaches of space, humanity's message continued to spread. The message that hope was not dead, that the darkness could be beaten, that even the smallest species, the youngest civilization, the most unlikely heroes, could change the course of history. The Dominion had come to conquer. Instead, they had awakened something they never expected. They had awakened humanity. And humanity, the galaxy was learning, never gave up, never surrendered, never stopped grinning in the face of impossible odds, because that was what it meant to be human. And that was why the galaxy would never be the same.